What's up, nerds? So Knights of the Seven Kingdoms just wrapped up last night, and I kind of want to give you just what it meant, what I feel it meant to me, and what I think the success of this show is asking. I have to say, I really enjoyed it. It's probably 6 of the best episodes of TV I've seen in a long time. Not going to do an in-depth review, but if you haven't seen it, I'm probably going to mention some spoilers here, so please don't watch this if you haven't watched or completed all 6 episodes of A Knights of the Seven Kingdoms. So what really surprised me about the show is it's not trying to out grimdark Game of Thrones or House of the Dragon or the other, Game of Thrones, Song of Ice and Fire adaptations that are out there, or maybe any that'll come. It's not chasing shock value. It's not looking for another red wedding moment, although we do have, that gut-wrenching scene there at the end of the trial at trial at Ashford at the tourney. It does lean into something way simpler, and what I think is way braver, especially in this landscape of storytelling that's out there right now. And it leans into kindness. The main character, Dunk, isn't a master strategist. He's not playing the Game of Thrones. He's just trying to be a good knight. He's just trying to be a good person. He stands up to Aerion Targaryen when he's, causing, when he's hurting people that couldn't defend themselves, and Dunk defends those that couldn't, and he pays for it, and the people around him pay for it. And at that moment, amongst other moments in the show, it really tells you what the show is all about. It's not about who wins power. It's not about who, can outthink the other people. It's really just about decency and how people, or how this main character, Dunk, can choose decency even when power isn't on his side. The Dunk and Egg dynamic, that reinforces Egg can flex his Targaryen privilege at any moment, and he just doesn't. He wants to understand the world. He challenges Dunk, he grows, and the relationship between the two of them, has both of them grow, and it's a respectful and honest relationship. There's no manipulation there, like you see in a lot of the other relationships in, the Game of Thrones stories. Even the violence, feels different. It's messy. It hurts. It doesn't feel like a spectacle. You see the fight in the alleyway when Arlen and Dunk first meet, and Arlen's throwing up, and they're fighting on the ground in the mud, and it just feels realistic in a world of historical mythology, fictional mythology. It just feels grounded. The story of Game of Thrones, has shown us, that Westeros is defined in betrayal and brutality. And the show reminds us that not only do monsters and ambition exist in the stories of Game of Thrones, but there are flawed people trying to live up to ideals. And we see that with Arlen of Pennytree, with Dunk, and with Egg specifically, and even other characters like Baelor, and to some degree Maekar and the other, and other characters, Raymond Fossaway. And, these characters are just, they're honest, and they're driven to do good things. I have to compare it to last year's Superman. That, I think, broke through in what was becoming a more edgier superhero tone, where that Superman had a lighter, more kind, heartfelt, and that really, took last summer by storm because of that. And I feel that same energy with the way people on social media are reacting to Dunk and Egg. We see, one example of that is with Dunk's trial at Ashford. One of the most powerful sequences, and probably one of the best episodes of TV, and certainly one of the best episodes of Game of Thrones TV, was episode 5 of this show. You see Dunk, who, who's newly knighted and insecure, and, he's obviously being, used as this puppet. He's standing up to Prince Aerion Targaryen, and, Dunk doesn't have an army. He doesn't really have anybody. He's going around begging people to help, and a few noble people decide to raise up, and you kind of see Dunk's, unbeknownst to him, his standing up against Aerion Targaryen is starting to fuel, this overarching, disdain for the Targaryens and their rule, and people are slowly, the murmurs are starting here, where this will all probably lead up, into Robert's Rebellion, which comes, down the road. Have the trial by combat, he's defending the powerless there, and, the knights who join him, aren't aligning for power, they're aligning for principle. And, even though a couple of them say that they have some selfish reasons for it, they're kind of there because the relationship they built with Dunk, and they see what Dunk is standing for. And it's all radically different than most Game of Thrones, stories that we've seen in the past. Knighthood isn't about armor and titles. It can be about choice. And we see that when Raymond Fossaway, stands up and asks to be knighted immediately. And he goes from literally being a squire to becoming knighted to not even putting armor and hopping on a horse and putting his life on the line, in order to defend Dunk's, Dunk's honor.
I charge you to be brave.
And although that scene was amazing, the real power is seen in the small, quiet scenes between Dunk and Egg throughout the story. Throughout all 6 episodes, it's deeply human. You see these two, misfits, for lack of a better word, trying to find, their family. And if you watch the show, you'll see how that resonates. Their conversations show, something Game of Thrones rarely pauses for, and that's mentorship, growth, friendship, built on respect rather than fear and power. The warmth between those two actors is phenomenal. It's absolutely, it's charming. It's fun to watch, and I know that I'm excited for more and more of it. Their ability to stand up for what's right reminds us that leadership doesn't always have to be forged in cruelty. It can be in kindness. Another thing too, you see the violence in the show. It's not without, it's with consequence, and it's not spectacle. The violence, it feels different in this show. The brutality, in Game of Thrones is often, functioned as punctuation, sudden, shocking, unforgettable. In this story, even the violence that you want to see when someone's standing up for someone, it feels uncomfortable. It feels costly. It never genuinely just feels, like action for the sake of action. It definitely has, has consequences. When Dunk fights, he bleeds, he struggles, he's doubt, he's not untouchable, he's not a mythical warrior, and, all the things, that occur, have consequences that ripple, outward. It's definitely a grounded approach. Heroism isn't domination. It's endurance in this story. I really genuinely love how the story does not apologize for having heart. It doesn't undercut the sincerity with cynicism. The actors in the show are phenomenal. I enjoyed all the portrayals of different characters. It felt like a really tight and great adaptation of the novella. We've had decades of anti-heroes. We've had a lot of morally gray everything out there. We've had dark reboots with gritty realism and deconstruction of characters. And I think audiences are starting to crave something different, because the way that people responded to this, the way that people responded to Superman, I feel shows that. Not simplistic heroes, not like cheesy optimism, but like just kindness. Heroes who try, heroes who care. They believe in something better, even when the world doesn't. Dunk choosing honor in Westeros. Superman choosing hope in that broken world where he had other heroes around him, that were just kind of like cynical and which, was a great way to show, the representation of Superman in that story. That's my biggest takeaway. In worlds built in darkness, light can stand out. And I do think audience will resonate with it. If you felt like you enjoyed this story, if you enjoyed the lightness in it, if you didn't, let me know too. I'd love to hear from you. Put some stuff in the comments below. What are some other stories that you may have read that kind of resonate with this kind of story? I enjoyed it. I'm looking forward to season 2. I can't wait to see where this goes. And, I'll talk to you guys soon. Bye.